Officials from the International Energy Agency and Canada's federal government met this past week to talk about how Canada can respond as the globe grapples with a growing energy crisis because of the war in Iran.
We need a willingness, this can be sometimes hard to accept, we need a willingness to use all sources of energy, including some gas, and all technologies beyond conventional renewables, certainly to nuclear, hydro, small modular reactors, carbon capture, and geothermal.
The talks highlighted the consequences, certainly, of the continued closure of the Strait of Hormuz and the potential that Canada has to become an even bigger global energy exporter. Fatih Birol is the executive director of the International Energy Agency, and I spoke to him earlier this week about his meeting with the Prime Minister and the role that he thinks Canada can play amid the growing energy crisis. Fatih Birol, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
You have said that the war in Iran and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz has created the largest energy crisis in history. Certainly people are feeling that, the oil and gas prices, the rise of those prices. What are the implications of this? What is your biggest concern right now?
My biggest concern is economy. A global economy will be affected, negatively affected. In many countries, we are going to see the inflation numbers going up and the economic growth will be much weaker. And it is especially in the emerging and developing countries in Asia, but also slowly but surely it will come to Africa and Latin America, but other parts of the world, such as Europe or Japan or Korea, are not immune to that. In fact, no country is immune to the effects of this crisis. And it's not only oil and gas, because the Strait of Hormuz was a route for fertilizers, for petrochemicals, for sulfur and others. We will discover more and more through the supply chains, how they are disturbed by the Strait of Hormuz being closed, especially starting with the agricultural sector.
You have talked about this being the beginning of a reset of energy markets, and of course you met with the Prime Minister of Canada. I assume that came up, and what role do you see Canada playing in that reset?
So, in the past, when we had major energy crisis like the oil crash in 1970s, or the 4 years ago after the Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the natural gas crash in Europe, there were major policy responses. It will be the same this time. Countries in the next few years will review their energy strategies, which fuels, which technologies, and which energy partners. And this time, when the countries choose their energy partners, the most important criteria will be the trust. And today, Canada is one of those countries that enjoys trust across the world, and this will be your maybe most important commodity to sell.
You have also, though, suggested on that issue of trust and reliability that it could cause governments and countries to move away from fossil fuels and towards renewables. So I wonder, is there a case then for Canada, for instance, to build a new pipeline, if that is also a possibility?
Now, the countries will definitely continue to use oil or natural gas. For example, Canada's LNG will be very important for many Asian countries or for Europe, where I live. But also nuclear power. Canada is one of the leaders in the world, both in the large scale, but also small modular reactors. Critical minerals. Canada has a lot of cards to play, in my view.
Understood. So as I'm sure you know, that Ottawa and Alberta have signed this MOU to potentially build a new pipeline from Alberta to the west coast of Canada. Do you think that makes sense, given what you're seeing for the future of fossil fuels?
I think when we look around the world, there will be still a need for fossil fuels, at least for some time. And today, there is a lot of need for Canadian energy in all of forms. So therefore, countries would prefer to get oil and gas from the countries that they trust, rather than there are major uncertainties and political questions. And in that respect, Canada has to make very good calculation whether or not this gas, this LNG terminal or whatever the other pipelines are going to meet the growing demand in other countries or not.
What else do you think the government should be doing then to get people to buy into the idea the Prime Minister has that this country is an energy superpower and should be used that way?
I think the most important issue here is that we have 3-4 years that the governments around the world will make huge decisions in terms of the energy trade, new partners, new technologies. And Canada is very well positioned to answer those demands from the countries around the world. It can be Asia, it can be Europe, it can be elsewhere. But here, the speed is very important. And the Canada has a multi-level governance system, and at the same time, Canadian government wants to hear all the voices, which is very good, and I respect it very much. I admire it, but this shouldn't be a reason to be slow, because there are only 3-4 years that the countries will make major decisions, and this will be the only challenge. And I was reassured by Prime Minister, with Energy Minister, and also the Finance Minister, that they are aware of the urgency of Canada stepping up. And I tell everybody, when I look at around the world, when I talk with the countries in Asia, with Africa, Europe, and elsewhere, I wish there were not one, but a few Canadas that could help to bring stability to the energy markets and further push the sustainability button.
I'll end on this because it's of concern to so many people, and that's around the shortage of jet fuel, certainly being felt in Europe, but there's at least one airline in Canada canceling some routes. There are concerns, obviously, in the U.S. What is the impact of this? And I wonder if you've had any conversations with the Trump administration about it.
Now, I talked with all the governments, with the Americans, but also Nigerians. They are important jet fuel exporters, Europeans, and everywhere. I said only a few weeks ago that Europe, especially Europe, has about 8 weeks of jet fuel left, because Europe was importing 75% of its jet fuel from Middle East. It is cut completely. And the bad news is, while the jet fuel imports are drying up, the demand for jet fuel, since we are coming to traveling season, increased by about 40%. So it is a rather serious issue, and we have seen several companies in Europe, Lufthansa, KLM, Scandinavian Airlines, Ryanair, they are reducing their flights substantially. I really hope that the Strait of Hormuz is open as soon as possible, and we get Europe gets the jet fuel from that region quickly.
Even if the Strait of Hormuz is opened up quickly, and we don't know where this is at as we're speaking, there will be a time lag, though, right, between the Strait opening and all of these issues being dealt with.
And definitely, it will not be the next day everything gets back to normal. It will be a gradual comeback, and in some cases it may take months, but in some cases it may take years, to be honest with you. Saudi Arabia and Iraq, they are not in the same basket. Iraq will take much longer, and oil and gas different. Oil may be a bit quicker, but natural gas, Qatar, a major gas exporter, very badly damaged Qatar terminal. So the name of the game will be volatility in the oil and gas markets in the next months, maybe years to come.
Fatih Birol, thank you so much for making time for me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mark Carney's government is proposing major changes to Canada's regulatory process with the hope of speeding up big infrastructure projects like pipelines, airports, nuclear facilities right across the country.
We can make more efficient from an investment perspective and from an economic competitiveness perspective the approval of these projects, while maintaining robust environmental protections and respecting the rights of Indigenous people. These can all be done at the same time. That's exactly what we intend to do.
The changes include streamlining the review process to no more than 1 year, introducing a new Crown Consultations Hub to engage Indigenous communities with projects, and giving cabinet ministers the power to exempt other conditions or some regulations as needed. The changes address criticisms the previous Liberal government faced around approving projects. We did request a government representative to come on the program and speak about the changes, but no one was made available. So earlier I spoke to the Conservative critic for energy and natural resources, Shannon Stubbs. And Shannon Stubbs joins me now. Nice to see you in person.
Yes, thanks for having me.
One of the central complaints, obviously, by Conservatives and others of the government has been that they're not moving quickly enough, that there's too many regulations in place. Much of what they've outlined here seems to address some of those concerns, and principally to get the review down to 1 year. What do you make of what you've seen so far?
Well, what's very striking is that what they're talking about and the way that they're framing it is, in fact, exactly what they already promised to do when they brought forward Bill C-5 and then they created that Major Projects Office. That was stemming from Mark Carney's promise in the election campaign that he would end up bringing fiscal and regulatory streamlining so that private sector proponents could build major projects for the benefit of all of Canada. What they're talking about today is almost verbatim exactly what they said a year ago. And the unfortunate reality is that this is an illusion. There's such a gap between their words and their actual actions a year and a half later. So we'll see what they bring forward.
Sure. This, though, I think it's broader. It's not just major national projects. It's all kinds of different projects, from ports to mines to everything. And I would suggest that it is making sure that if C-5 is sunsetted in the next 4 years, that these changes are more permanent.
Well, that is what they had indicated they would do. But this is what's very curious about it. In Bill C-5, at the back of the bill, they list 12 laws and 7 regulations. So by their very admission, those are the laws and regulations that they brought in themselves that are stopping building. So I would just say, a year after they made these promises, a year after they said that office would get major projects built at speeds never seen before in generations, none of that has actually happened. And what has taken so long for them to come forward to now actually announce what they did, which was consultations about a discussion paper. They should be coming forward today with a full-scale fiscal and regulatory repeal and reform agenda that actually gets them out of the way, fixes or repeals entirely all of those laws and regulations that they say themselves block building, so that the private sector can make these investments, take that risk and build this infrastructure project.
And fair enough. Will they actually do it? Will they follow through? Will anything come from it? Those are all fair questions for the government. But if they do go through with it, does that address all the concerns that Conservatives have had?
Well, the problem is that they haven't actually changed any of those laws or those regulations that are blocking building. And on top of it, they are doubling down on saying they're going to maintain the federal industrial carbon tax, a cost for Canadian businesses, and that hikes costs all across the supply chains that the United States does not impose upon itself. They're keeping, for example, their fuel standard, which will make the costs of gas and fuel and diesel skyrocket. They still have in place their energy censorship legislation that prohibits Canadian energy companies from talking about their innovation and their accomplishments. They've still got on the books, as you know, drilling bans and tanker bans and all this layering and pancaking of legislation, policy, and taxes that has driven $1 trillion out of Canada into the United States.
Yeah, some of it does sound like it could work, though, and it's as though it is some of the things industry is concerned about. And I'll point to one that is not just industry, but communities as well, this One Crown consultation process. So this would help consultations within Indigenous communities, so it's all happening in the same place. That is often what holds up these projects, too, right? They can't get enough communities on board. What do you make of that idea?
Well, the Liberals absolutely do have to show Canadians how they are going to fulfill their duty to consult, because the only way to get to yes on major projects is to do it in a good way with Indigenous communities. And of course, the Liberals themselves have failed in Indigenous consultation before, as they did in TMX, but they did it again. They do have a strong model to stand on. But I think what's most important is for Canadians to be seeing this reality, which is that a year in, they've made these promises, they've made these claims, they said there would be certain results and outcomes, but instead they made 15 referrals, not a single new project is being built, not a single new project has received a national designation. Only one of those referrals is in front of the Impact Assessment Agency. And you know what, Rosie? There's 72 projects in front of the 3 other regulators right now, trying, I guess, to find a light at the end of the tunnel. But we're in over a year of an urgent crisis, jobs and fiscal situation for Canada that this government has the power to change because they're the ones who made the mess in the first place. So forgive me if Canadians aren't necessarily pulling out their oven mitts to bake hero cookies when these guys haven't done any of the things they actually said they would do a year ago.
Yeah.
And now they're saying they're going to launch consultations that has no real timelines. There's going to be a discussion paper that seem to have no real timelines. But they already know what they need to do by virtue of bringing forward Bill C-5. And to your point, exactly, this is the question they have to answer. What's the point of the MPO if the systems are working? And why aren't you fixing the systems to make it work for all and everyone?
Let me end on the MOU, because obviously that's your home province. The Premier of Alberta believes that the progress has been made over the past couple of days, primarily in Ottawa with the Prime Minister, and thinks that they will have something to put on the table in terms of a pipeline proposal by the next deadline. How big a deal is that for Alberta if you get to a place where the pipeline, it seems to be approved?
Well, kudos to the Alberta government and all of their efforts to getting important policy and legislative changes to be made, and also to all the premiers and territorial leaders who've been pushing Prime Minister Mark Carney on the exact same issue. I think the key question for Albertans and all Canadians, because the majority of Canadians also support more oil and gas expansion and more energy infrastructure exports, the key question is this fundamental problem, which is that the private sector proponents who build pipelines are saying what the government has to do is repeal or reform all of those build blocking laws and policies. They need to get rid of the federal industrial carbon tax and other taxes.
Sure, but if they come to an agreement with Alberta on how that's going to unfold, presumably industry will go along with it.
And none of this would even be hypothetical if what they were coming out with today, already a little bit too little too late, was that full-scale reform and repeal agenda of their anti-development legislation, policies and taxes that the proponents say is stopping them from making pipeline proposals, investing and building them. They should be coming forward that agenda today so that a private sector proponent will want to take the risk to build those pipelines that will benefit every single Canadian all across the country, help make life more affordable, and actually establish Canadian self-reliance, security, and economic and national sovereignty.
Nice to see you. Thank you for coming in.
Well, thank you. Really nice to see you too.